invite you to toast the closed-down party at the Walnut Street Theater. We owe it a great debt of gratitude to the House Community Funds who've all made this possible. And today we've invited you to share with us the last few nostalgic moments. The theater as it stands now needs many changes and will have many changes.
The oldest theater in the English-speaking world isn't ensconced in the English countryside, as one might think, nor is it found among the commercial glitter of Broadway. Surprisingly, it's located in the corner of 9th and Walnut Streets in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. For over 163 years, the Walnut Street Theater has withstood the struggles, successes, and failures of those who performed and those who came to see. Even with her plaster peeling, she was one of the great landmarks of American theatrical history. Booths, the Barrymores, Drews, and Keens all left their mark, and perhaps the Walnut touched them. For 30 years, the Walnut had been a Broadway tryout and roadshow house for the Shuberts. The list of important plays and players which found their way to her stage was staggering. During the Depression, the Walnut was a home for the WPA Theater Project and the Federal Orchestra.
Everybody you can think of appeared there. George Arliss reopened the Walnut in 1920, and I was just a little boy at that time. I can remember my father sitting me there on the front row, and I being so impressed with this beautiful, new, immaculate theater with the red and gold and white. Talking about musicals, most people forget that some of the great musicals of all time have played at the Walnut. In fact, the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court with William Gaxton opened there at the Walnut. And the Marx Brothers used to play there. In fact, they used to play through the summer on the days before air conditioning. The Walnut was one of the few theaters that seemed to be cool enough that could stay open during a great part of the summer.
Lot of reasons. I remember Mr. Roberts, but I remember that I had caught a virus bug like the flu just before we got to Philadelphia, and I didn't miss a performance, but I was living in the hospital under a doctor's care, and he would get me ready, and I'd get out of bed and go to the theater and play the performance and come back to the hospital afterwards for a week. I think we played it two or 3 weeks, but the first week I was in the hospital. I also remember that Roberts was overwritten and was known to be. Josh Logan and Hagen both were aware that they had overwritten in the sense of length, but they liked all of it, didn't know what to cut. So we played it in its full version through Philadelphia. It was such a good play that they would sit there till 1 o'clock. I played Gift of Time. That was a beautiful play that I did with Olivia de Havilland. Garson Kanin wrote and directed. And I remember we did most of our work in Philadelphia in the sense that the work that you do after you've played it to an audience. I mean, we had our 4 weeks of rehearsal in New York before we came to Philadelphia, of course. But Ruth Gordon, who was married to Garson, was always with him, and I remember, and was at all the rehearsals and saw every performance. And Garson and Ruth and I, and usually Olivia, would go, the four of us go after theater for a little supper someplace, very often the Automat, because they had good cream chip beef on toast.
One of the important things about theater, one of the most important things about it is tradition. We live on tradition. It's our soul food in the theater. And it's hard to hold on to it anymore because here in New York City, we've been losing too many of our theaters that had tradition and do tell the story of the continuity of wonder in the American theater. But therefore, it's a very exciting and a very gratifying thing that the Walnut is happening. I remember the Walnut Street Theater for a great many plays that I've done there over the years, and if it's there, I never pass it without seeing those plays in my mind and reliving the experience and the excitement of it. From my point of view, and from the point of view of all of us in the theater, that's a necessity of life. I am very proud that and grateful that the Walnut is still going to be there, because the last time I played, I broke the all-time house record for 160 years that it had been there. And I remember we had a little ceremony in the lobby, not because we broke the house record, but because it was the 160th anniversary of the Walnut Street Theater. It's good to be of now, it's good to be of tomorrow, but we mustn't forget about yesterday.
Since the theater was built in 1808, it has been altered and renovated a dozen times. Despite the repairs, the building was essentially left untouched. Under the 4 coats of paint, false brickwork, and 18 inches of plaster, architect John Haviland's Walnut Street Theater of 1828 still exists. The latest renovation and first restoration began in 1969, financed by the Haas Community Funds. Resident architect F. Brian Loving and restorationist architect John Dickey directed the project.
It's Haviland's building that's important in the history of architecture. To understand why it is significant, it is necessary to remember what other buildings were being built and how differently people thought about architecture in those days. The year 1828 was the height of the classical revival, which had started here in Philadelphia some 30 years before. It's important, too, to keep in mind that symbolism was enormously important in this neoclassic architecture in a very direct sense that's hard for us even to imagine. Classical architecture itself stood for virtue, patriotism, George Washington, and the United States. Looking at it was sincerely believed to have a redeeming effect on the beholder, a theory which has unfortunately been proved false during the past century or so in Washington.
Talking about Walnut Street Theater, as I remembered, there's so many other facets to it that I could talk about. The actors who have played here and whom I all knew personally, and the social aspect of this theater, because this was, as you all know, one of the first theaters in the country, if not the first, to use played legitimate performances. And it was a big social function, a big social event to come to the Walnut Street Theater. I remember when they used to, I better not tell that, it'll give my age away. but I remember when they used to come here bedecked with jewels and furs, and men were in white tie. It was a big social event, like almost as important as the opera. And unfortunately, that's finished. But I think the new owners of the Walnut Street Theater have great plans for the future, and I just hope that they succeed and come to fruition, because they sound great.
In our restoration, we want to go back to Haviland's design as closely as we possibly can. In general, this will not be difficult. We can match the marble and determine the exact shade of paint. We know that the 1830 sketch is accurate because many elements remain to be seen in the early photographs. Inevitably, some details will have to be changed or invented.
I guess it was December 1949 when we opened at the Walnut Street Theater, and I remember very vividly when we were towards the end of rehearsals in New York, and Ethel Waters and Brandon DeWilde and all the rest of us, William Hanson, we were told that we were going to open at the Walnut Street Theater in Philadelphia, which was the oldest theater in America, and it was traditionally a very beautiful theater, and that it had housed, like the Empire Theater in New York, an enormous amount of the theater's best talent over the years. I guess people like Edwin Booth and Bernhardt had all appeared there. So I went, I think, with great excitement, looking forward to seeing this theater. I love Philadelphia because it always means Christmas to me, because not only with Member of the Wedding was I there at Christmas, but I think I was in Philadelphia with a play called Cologne by Anouilh at Christmas time. I was there with the Lark at Christmas time. And when I did step through the stage door for the first time, I thought that it did have something like the Empire, in that it was kind of an aura of wonder about it. The corridor down to the dressing rooms was very long, and little old-fashioned gas jets coming out of the walls. And then I remember our opening night, we had a long dress rehearsal, and lots of things went wrong that afternoon. I don't remember whether the time was 8:30 or 8 o'clock for the opening, but we worked up to half an hour before the opening night. And finally somebody said, "You have to stop because the audience is going to come in." I put on my first act costume, and in half an hour we were opening the play. First opening anywhere, ever. And we walked on the stage. Brandon, I think, was 7 or 7.5, and was playing my cousin John Henry West. And he had a little sunsuit on and his glasses, and he walked on the stage, and we all assembled because when the curtain goes up, we were all there to begin. So we took our places, and I could hear the sea of voices out on the other side of the curtain. And Brandon looked at me, and he looked at Miss Waters, and he said, "Are all those people going to watch us?" And his father flew out from the wings and said, but it's all right, Brendan. They're going to enjoy it. And he started to cry. The tears started to roll down his face. And the curtain goes up. His father goes into the wings. The curtain goes up. And it was like the sunshine hit him. He was just marvelous. He was so unconcerned. He never looked at the audience. He did his part just beautifully. Well, I don't remember that opening night as well as I remember the opening night of Ready When You Are CB, which was a comedy. But Member of the Wedding was a strange and beautiful play. And I guess the opening night went well enough. I know that we left the whole second act in Philadelphia. They thought the play was too long, so they scratched the whole second act. That was a whole beautiful set that had been built and a whole part of the company that had to be fired, which was rather sad for all of us, but that was part of opening a play out of town and discovering what would go and what wouldn't go. But I guess the theater brought us luck.